Hey, this is John Lee Dumas, the founder and host of Entrepreneurs on Fire. And if you're wanting to learn how to embrace change and navigate through disruption as a leader, then listen to the Leadership is Changing podcast with my good friend, Denis Gianoutsos. He's prepared to ignite.
Welcome to Leadership is Changing. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change. This is taking your leadership to another level by finding the balance between executive excellence and personal well-being through stories that inspire real change. It's time to adapt in our fast-moving world when leadership is changing with your host, Denis Gianoutsos.
I'll start with the easy stuff, which is right back to the start. As you said, I'm born in Papua New Guinea. I'm a Papua New Guinean citizen. I'm proud of my PNG heritage, and I enjoy being able to come back to Papua New Guinea to add value after working and setting up a life in Australia. The Brian Bell Group was started in 1958. It's a 63-year-old business that started as a little gun shop in a small suburb in Port Moresby called Ella Beach, and it's grown to be one of Papua New Guinea's most recognised business brands. Certainly not the biggest retailer in the country, but highly respected and regarded, and our team over the 63 years have done a wonderful job in building the reputation of the business, really focused on providing quality service and value. And I am fortunate to have two wonderful daughters, a beautiful wife. They live in Australia and I work in PNG. FaceTime and all the modern communications are how we go about life. And that's not uncommon for people that work abroad. And COVID certainly has made that a bit of a challenge for us. But no, I'm delighted to be back working in PNG and with the team here that are doing some amazing things to change the way our customers shop in our business and give back to the community in a really positive way. It's a great environment to be in.
That's excellent. And I see with the retail and so forth, especially with lockdowns and that being, we're relying a lot on supermarkets, of course, to actually provide us the food and everything we need to be able to survive as we stay at home for sure. It's a really important aspect of our life at the moment too, along with what you just said around FaceTime and technology, helping us stay in touch with family and friends and loved ones around the world, especially when we can't go and visit them for sure. So it's real important stuff. Hey, Ian, how did you get into leadership?
Look, I think I was fortunate enough to be surrounded by leaders as a child. My grandfather started the business. My father was obviously involved in the business at a senior level. I was influenced by people running a business and leading teams of people from a very early age. I decided to go and forge my own identity and learn a little bit more about retail outside of the Papua New Guinea environment and moved to Australia. And I came from an environment where you were expected to work hard all the time. And for me, as an early person, I didn't have aspirations to be a leader as such, but over time, just as a result of having an expectation that I worked hard, I was provided with opportunities, fortunately, to take on more significant roles. And slowly that formed some leadership credibility amongst the people that I was working with. And I had some really strong mentors over the time that provided me the opportunity to then take on more and more. All of a sudden, one minute you're stacking shelves or doing things that just need to be done, and to suddenly responsible for and accountable for more significant parts of the business. So I'm fortunate that I'd argue that in some ways I was surrounded by it early, and that influenced me very quickly. And others, I think I've just been fortunate that I've had good mentors that have identified that maybe I had some leadership qualities that were valuable and helped to steer me to a place where I could use those.
Yeah. Okay, good. So you mentioned a couple of things I want to do a little bit of a deep dive on. One is around your own identity. Do you think developing your own leadership identity is important?
I absolutely do, Dennis. I think that if I just talk personally for a minute, I was born into a family that had a small business that was growing. It was recognized as a teenager. You want to be your own person and recognized for your own skills, etc. And I was working in an environment where everyone knew who I was because of my father and my grandfather. When you get to 19 and everywhere you go, someone says, "Oh, you're Sir Brian's grandson," or "You're Trevor's son." I decided that maybe it was time that I went and learned some things and set my own course, because it was important that I built my own credibility or brand as such, and decided off I'd go and do my own thing. The expectation was for a short period of time. It turned out to be much longer than that. I always tell people that I was a very slow learner, but I think that your own credibility, your own style, your own, I'm going to call it brand, but that's very important because when you talk about reputations, when you talk about integrity, authenticity is very important. And I think for me, it's really important that people identify what it is they stand for and work really hard to maintain that expectation of those people around them.
Yeah, yeah. That's good. Very good. So yeah, your brand, but there's so many things you've just covered off there, which is brilliant. The second area I wanted to do a little bit of a deep dive on, and which is you talked about having some strong mentors around you. How important is it for people to actually think about who are either wanting to get into leadership or are at a certain leadership level, but they want to go to more senior levels or to a larger scale? How important is it for them to have mentors, and what should they do to try and find a mentor?
Look, I think, Dennis, I think it's critical. I think that no one is going to realize their potential without support. I know that there's plenty of examples where people have, but I think that if they reflect on their journey, there will always be people that have influenced them either directly or indirectly. And so I think that having some people around you that can provide you with some steer, some direction, some guidance, some honesty around the things that you need to be doing to go to the places that you want to from a leadership perspective is a critical part of your development. And I've been very fortunate along the way that while I might not have realized it at the time, that I had people that were invested in my success and, or at least me doing well, whether it was to support them in their roles or just to see me be the best that I could be. I think that's really important. I think it's important that you have close contacts, whether they're inside the business or outside your work environment, that know you well, that provide you with that steer. I credit a lot of things to a lot of people, but I also can't underestimate the patience and tolerance of my wife, who knows me better than anyone and just belts me around the head every now and then when it's time to say, this is what you need to have a good hard look at. And those sorts of conversations are really important.
Yeah, I think the words that you used before about having them being honest and having some honesty with you and having that honest conversation, and you called it built around the head a couple of times, but you think at the end of the day, it's really what we talk about is that there are people who have got, as you said, vested interest in you. They've got your back, but they've got your back in a good way in the sense that they want to look after you and make sure you succeed. And so having those honest conversations is going to be really important for sure. Excellent. Ian, you may have several here, but I'm going to ask you this question in the sense of, who is your favorite leader? Now, this person could be alive or from history, but who's your favorite leader and why?
I think that's a really tough question for me, as if I'm honest. I think about when people ask me this question, who I would consider my favorite leader. I think that there's not one person that I say to me influences the things that I've learned from or the environments that I've been in that I've taken the most from. I'd say I take lots of little pieces from the people that I see or the people that influence me. I love seeing stuff on Nelson Mandela. I love reading about people like Abraham Lincoln because they're pioneers or they've demonstrated amazing courage. I was still am a big Barack Obama fan because you're talking about breaking down barriers and a guy who can inspire people with a conversation. For me, in terms of favorite leader, I've got some people that I work with that really have influenced me over my journey. There's a gentleman that I work with in the Coles Wesfarmers world for a number of years who can only be described as firm but fair and genuinely invested in your success. And Mark was a very strong influence on my development as a leader. But I can't put it down to one person. I always look to people for whether they have an authenticity, whether they can inspire people, whether they deliver messages that you take away and reflect on a regular basis because they're meaningful. And it's a tough question to answer with just one person. I think if I could wash up one leader alive or dead, it would be a person who embodies all of those qualities that are important to me: authenticity, honesty, integrity, inspiration. There are people that have probably got elements of all of that. And if you're taking those elements and making one person, I'm not sure they're out there, but maybe I haven't found them yet.
Well, it's slightly eclectic, but let's start with the simple part. So before Parliament, actually, I used to work for Southern Cross Health Society, so actually health insurance, and wasn't the salesman. My role was to negotiate all the contracts with the various doctors, specialists, and hospitals across the country. So contract relations, negotiations has been a big part of my background in the private sector before Parliament. I was in the public sector before that, used to do the negotiation for the Ministry of Social Development on their social programs. And then the slightly quirky part of my background, Dennis, is I spent my 20s training as a Catholic priest. So I suspect this might be the first ex-seminarian you've had on your podcast. I don't know, but I spent 9 years, training as a priest. And that came with a whole lot of different experiences too.
Oh, wow. That's fascinating. And tell me, the transition between being a priest or becoming a priest into the public sector, then into the private sector, and now back into the public sector, what have those transitions been like for you?
And not as difficult as you might think, and that's not to presume your own thinking, but it wasn't too difficult, particularly moving from trainee priest life to politicians, probably easier than people realize. To be completely blunt, church politics is far more brutal than it is in parliamentary politics. But also, I suppose, in those years of seminary training, you're being trained for leadership, for responsibility. So that translated quite well into Parliament. And I suppose in my public and then private roles, the fact that I had to be engaging and talking and understand people, those are some good transferable skills there too.
Yeah, cool. And is that how you got into leadership?
Yeah, well, I think, yes. Yeah, look, if my family were here, they would tell you that right from a young age, I've always been an opinionated something. Yeah, very opinionated. So even in my school days was always getting involved in things. But I suppose that training in the 20s particularly helped me, if you will, hone some leadership, because that's what you've been formed up to be. And people look to you to lead in different ways. Eventually it wasn't for me, partly because actually I wanted to get into politics, wanted to get into Parliament. And for whatever reason, which I'm grateful for, I managed to achieve that.
Yeah, wonderful. And tell me, even from when you were a kid and that wanting to get involved in things, I think that's quite important for leaders to put their hand up and step forward and do things. Well, what are your thoughts on that? Should they be putting their hand up more often? Should they be stepping up to things?
I think so. There's always going to be different forms of leadership, but in general terms, I think you do have to lead and lead by example and lead from the front. The historian in me doesn't particularly like part of that when you think about all the officers leading from the front in various battles and first to be shot. But I think actually there's a real place for leadership by example, and it's certainly something I've tried to follow in my journey across various roles in leadership.
Okay, cool. And you've talked about the historian side of you. So here's my next question to you, and that is, who's your favorite leader? Now, this person can be alive or can be from history. So who's your favorite leader and why?
And that's why I always hate this question. But look, the one that's been on my mind of late, actually, he's dead. William Wilberforce, actually, probably most well known because of his anti-slavery work. And I suppose that's part of what inspires me. But he was also the first to work for animal welfare, prison reform, which I'm slightly, having been a prison chaplain, grateful for that. So he's someone who did a remarkable array of things in themselves. But I think what stands out for me with Wilberforce was his just utter determination. He just didn't give up. And I love that about him.
Yeah, I think that's an important trait for a lot of us in life today is don't give up. And I think that's really important. And interesting how you mentioned him, because Wilberforce is a street that I grew up in Wilberforce Street in Wellington, actually. I grew up in that street. And yeah, so it's interesting you mentioned his name for sure. And it's the determination and not giving up with things is really important for us. And for a lot of people, it's just easy to roll over and just give up.
Yeah,
I think that's one trait that a lot of leaders need to have today. What's one thing or two things that you think that leaders probably need to have be able to have that determination, that grit, that do not give up? What do you think they should do?
I think a big part of it, I've certainly found in the political realm, you've got to understand what you stand for and why. So if you're going to be in a position of leadership, trying to guide, if you're going to be leading a team, if you've got a vision for your sales targets, or in my case, policy in Parliament, you as the leader have to understand what you're asking for at such a level that you can easily and readily articulate it to people. I suppose it comes from another part of my academic background that if you can't explain an idea to someone quickly and simply, you yourself don't understand it. So yeah, leaders knowing what they think, and importantly, knowing then why. Lots of people will be very emotive and expressive of what they believe, but when you press them for why, why is it? That's often I find lacking. So I think that's a critical element in leadership.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's beautiful what you just said there, because on the surface, it sounds good, or it's the emotional side of things. But as you scrape that surface or dive a little bit deeper, there's nothing there, or it's just not happening. So I think you're right. A lot of leaders do need to actually understand that why. And in particular, when things get hard or difficult for us, if we don't know the why and we don't understand, then we will give up. Otherwise, But if we do know the why, then that's what's really going to help us stay on course and where we're going.
Look, absolutely. It also means that you can have a proper and full conversation with people, including have very different opinions. Again, probably not unsurprising to your listeners. In politics, it's divisive, but actually some of the best and easiest conversations I've had is with opponents who equally and clearly know why they think. It makes a robust, often respectful conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good. And there's nothing worse than having leaders who don't know where they're going, don't know their why, or don't even make a decision. And I think even if they do have a decision or a why and it's opposing, that's cool. Have that conversation, have that debate, but then also listen to what the others are saying too. And hey, you might be surprised and learning something else from someone else.
Look, exactly right. And you've always got to be open to learning more. This is the paradox or the flip side. You have to have the confidence in your opinion. You have to understand why. But in reverse, you must always be open to understanding where others are coming from. They can be equally as strong and as grounded as you, but different. And so it's a constant engagement, learning, and I think that is an important part of leadership.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Leadership is Changing with your host, Denis Gianoutsos. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change, inspiring executives and leaders to adapt and lead a bigger game in a fast-moving world.